Project Zomboid drops you face first into an apocalypse which has already started. Each survivor has apparently had an absolute blinder of a night out and wakes up a week into an apocalypse with nothing but the clothes on their back. In this video, we decided to take that one step further and take some inspiration from the post-apocalyptic love child of Todd Howard, placing all of the Patreon supporters of my multiplayer server in an underground bunker. Many years after the outbreak, resources are running low, the air filtration system has ceased function, and these haphazard bunker dwellers must leap from the proverbial pan to proverbial fire in order to escape into a world that has long forgotten them. With the jumpsuited masses gathered with whatever weapons they could find, we took our first steps into the tunnels, away from the relative safety and comfort of our chambers. Immediately, we were face to face with the undead, thankfully on the other side of some iron bars. Now, in the face of adversity, one survivor attempted to reassure us by informing us of their highly sought after forklift qualification. Now, rationally concerned by the fact I was clearly fighting alongside an Amazon warehouse employee that would be demanding outrageous liberties like regular bathroom breaks, we pushed forward into the unknown. Our first engagements in the overgrown, dimly lit tunnels went surprisingly well, despite our lackluster weaponry. We quickly learned that forming a front line and backpedaling in unison where necessary was the way to go. Together, we were a wall that would bring any Roman legionnaire to tears.
This is Sparta!
Unfortunately, despite the presence of the forklift hero in our midst, we were soon to transition from emulating the Romans to taking a soiree into impersonating the French.
Guys, there's a lot. Back off.
All it took was a bad corner, a rather large handful of pissed-off dead people, and for someone to get bitten by aforementioned pissed-off dead people, for survivors to embrace their inner francophone. Following this incident, our party that had spent as much time in a basement as the average World of Warcraft player was nursing wounds, dealing with broken weaponry, and dwindling courage as escapes looked further and further away, as our situation was worsening. Thankfully for us, we came across two Smurfs with a gore fetish locked in a cage, followed by a slightly more useful room full of equipment. I stocked up on supplies including a torch, a prison shank, and some sterilized bandages. Now, I know what you might be thinking. There were a bunch of guns back there, and better weaponry. But you see, I was taking a page from the book of my British heritage and had decided that instead of fighting for myself, I would stand behind a collection of misguided souls from across the globe that had willingly or otherwise pledged allegiance to me. You see, I was holding the whistle, and it was about to signal my soldiers to go over the top. Over the next 30 minutes or so, my quote-unquote volunteers proudly served Britannia and cleared a path for my escape, wading through countless undead in search of daylight and freedom. Local law enforcement was even sent to stop us in our tracks, to no avail, offering us a significant amount of equipment, upgrades, and armor to provide limited protection. We were making some serious headway as we continued to paint the walls of the bunker red with the blood of our enemies, knowing that it wouldn't be long before we found our way out. We just had to survive long enough to make it. In the heat of a scuffle with the undead, I once again found myself experiencing that heart-dropping moment we're all so familiar with in Project Zomboid, suffering a wound and immediately wondering if this was my fate being sealed. Thankfully, it was just a scratch, and the sterilized bandages I picked up earlier ensured that I wasn't going to pick up an infection that would hurt me later, should I make it out of the bunker alive. Now, what I didn't notice at the time was that I'd lost something of the highest importance when those grubby little hands were laid upon my person, my fedora. Rather than do the reasonable and adult thing, which would be to discard it as a simple piece of clothing when I finally noticed it was gone, I instead opted to recruit a small band of survivors and adopt a leave no hat behind policy. After all, I was obviously the protagonist in this story, and what good is a main character without a perfect taste in headwear? Can you honestly say that you would have felt the same about Indiana Jones if he had been hatless? I didn't think so. Thankfully, a hatless existence was one I was not destined for, and we were able to retrace my steps and find the fedora relatively quickly. Then it was back to the group to continue our escape. Somewhere along the way, whilst I was adopting the new hat policy, my teammates had apparently chosen to adopt some furries instead. In fact, our formerly uniform bunch of vault dwellers clad in nothing but blue jumpsuits were now about as diverse as a university advertising pamphlet, featuring a Satan-worshipping cultist, some local traffic cops, cursed party clowns, and a spiffo-headed schoolgirl. Truly, we were a symbol of inclusion and acceptance. By this point, we had lost a few players to the shambling masses, and the biggest fights were yet to come. Using the terrain to our advantage, we funneled a huge horde of zombies through a choke point, whilst clubbing them like a bunch of innocent baby seals in an equally unethical manner. It wasn't much longer after that we found signs of the exit being close by. The train tracks were familiar to many as a feature to the Raven Creek bunker system, so naturally, rather than sticking together, we all let enthusiasm get the better of us, scattered into many small groups, and proceeded to get thoroughly and utterly lost. I found myself accompanied by a couple of other loyal survivors as we went from room to room, finding nothing but closed iron gates and the signs of bloodshed left behind by some of the other now scattered parties. Still, we had come this far, and perseverance eventually proved to reward us as we found our way to the main exit of the bunker. We had been through hell together and came out the other side. I took a minuscule moment to honour the fallen before once again returning to my British roots, discarding my companions like a child does to a toy they've grown bored of.
I don't want to play with you anymore.
And instead seeking new lands to conquer, colonize, and exploit for their spices that I'd no doubt refuse to add to my food. As I once again found myself in the all too familiar loneliness of Project Zomboid, now, much to my dismay, fighting zombies myself instead of having paying patrons do it for me and acting as meat shields, I took a moment to consider the steps ahead of me. This far into the apocalypse, the zombie masses would no doubt be swelling to maximum capacity, and it was the middle of the night, which meant passing through any level of foliage could be a fatal affair that I'd soon come to regret. Not to mention, as I gave myself a once-over, I was sporting 2 wounds that would need to be regularly tended to, and a dwindling supply of water to both hydrate myself and clean my bandages. I had escaped the bunker, but was worse for wear, and it was going to be a real challenge to try and make it to signs of civilization. I spent the night taking care of many zombies that thankfully gave me a few items for my trouble, like a large backpack and some better clothing. The only trouble was, this was all taking a lot of time, and my character was suffering. Eventually though, after fighting through pain from my wounds, hunger, thirst, and a rising sense of existential dread that could only be compared to that of the average My Chemical Romance enjoying Tumblr user, I was finally given respite with the rising sun, and I was able to navigate much more effectively. I had stumbled across a parking lot for a nearby construction site which, thanks to the high levels of vegetation, looked much more like a nature reserve, and apparently the zombies were on the lookout for poachers, because I found myself fighting through undead wildlife rangers to even get into the area. That said, I knew one of these vehicles could be my ticket to safety, so I stopped for a few moments to grab some bandages from the rotting corpse's clothing, which I've been assured by my doctor is horrifically unhygienic. Then I scoured vehicle after vehicle searching for a glimmer of hope, until finally a lifeline. A banged up blue step van that had been hotwired by another survivor before me. Of course, there had to be a reason it was left behind, and upon inspecting the vehicle, that reason was that there was no gas in the tank. Now I had no gas can, of course, so I had to get creative here. I took a risk and emptied the last remaining drops of water in my water bottle before topping it up with gas from a nearby vehicle. It was a tiny amount of fuel, but it was all I'd need to get me into Raven Creek, and then my post-apocalyptic life could begin anew. And so ends the story of those trapped in a bunker whilst the zombie apocalypse raged above them, only to re-emerge years later into a post-apocalyptic world with a twisted food chain. If you're wondering where all of this was recorded, you can find a link to my Patreon in the description, where you can subscribe for £3 a month and support me as a creator to do what I do best, help us commission custom-made Project Zomboid mods for the entire community, and most importantly, join us on our whitelisted Project Zomboid server, where we host unique monthly themes and server events just like this one on a regular basis. A huge thank you to my existing patrons for their support and for featuring in this video. Thanks for watching, folks, and I will see you all in the next one.